Jesus Christ being the maker of the entire universe, he made everything, he made us, right? Not even Jesus Christ, the king of the universe, the ruler of everything, demands absolute power over people. And he can have it. But he's given us our will, our free will. We are autonomous beings. So when you come under a system like a socialist or communist system, you're giving away your autonomy. Hey friends, Sonia here. I've been having some thoughts about socialism and communism and capitalism and all these isms that we know are not necessarily started by God, right? I want to talk about forms of government where God has no place compared to those where he has a place. Okay, so today we're going to talk about socialism, communism, totalitarianism, and of course capitalism. Not going to cover capitalism so much. That's what we live. That's the system we live under right now in the United States. We live under a system of capitalism, which is more free enterprise. Okay, where the people are the sovereign. And of course, capitalism, it's an economic system, right? And that's essentially what some of these are. They can grow up to be something else other than just economics, but systems where government has total control, and I'll get into that in a minute. But under capitalism, it's more of freedom. It's on the basis of freedom. It's a free market system where the demand of the people drives the prices, as opposed to where a control system where a government is essentially controlling everything. Okay, socialism is an infant form of totalitarianism, and communism is the adolescent version of the same. Okay, communism is a socio-political and economic ideology that advocates for a stateless, classless society. If actually that's accomplished ever. They're advocating for a stateless, classless, you can see how much of a ridiculous system it is already, classless society with common ownership of the means of production. That is, there's no such thing as private business. Everything is owned in common. That's what communism is. But really what you end up getting is a class system where there are those people who are, have big positions in the party, in that central government, in the system. That's the class. So you have that class of people who literally can control everything, right? They can control the money, the economy, and everything. Whereas there's the other people, and also the dissonants. Dissonants may be jailed. When I say dissonants, people who don't agree with the system, speak against the system, and really there is no freedom of speech, so you're not speaking against the system, right? So it's a stateless society that, with common ownership of the means of production, it envisions a system where sources are distributed based on need, aiming to eliminate social inequalities and exploitation inherent in capitalist systems. Okay, so it's aiming for that. But what have we seen in the world? We've seen communism devolve into really chaos, right? Socialism is a political and economic system where the people collectively own or control the means of production. So it sounds very similar, okay, but it's not as stringent as communism. Rather than private individuals or corporations. So we're against private ownership again, okay? Same as in communism. So this can involve public ownership, community ownership, or other forms of collective control. So we're not having individual families or individuals owning anything. At its core, socialism aims for a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources compared to capitalism. Socialism, you're not really focused on a state per se, but it is a state, right? It's a political and economic system where the people collectively own or control the means of production rather than private individuals or corporations, okay? So what do you call this collective ownership? Well, it's the state, right? It's the state government. This can involve public ownership, community ownership, or other forms of collective control. At its core, socialism aims for a more equitable distribution of wealth and resources compared to capitalism. So basically, you're making sure that nobody is left out, okay? You don't have haves and have-nots, you just have haves. Of course, the haves may be at a very low level, but they're trying to create an equal playing field for everyone. So it's equitable. You don't have people who are way below the poverty line and people who are way above the poverty line, where you have the 1%ers, etc. Again, communism is a political and similar to socialism, political and economic ideology that aims for a stateless, classless society with control or common ownership of the means of production. Again, sounds like socialism. It typically involves the elimination of private property, similar to socialism, and the redistribution of wealth. So this is where you go above, you go the next step. Okay, you go the next step in eliminating private property and redistributing the wealth to achieve its goals. So it's more violent, right? You're taking away, let's say you go from a system of private ownership to now you're going to a system of communism. You have to actually take away, you have to rob Peter to help Paul. You have to take away from those people who have worked hard for what they have, and you redistribute it so that people who don't have something now have something, right? At the same time, you're removing any kind of motivation to work hard, okay? Any motivation to innovate, all right? Because if it's going to be taken from you anyway, why should you innovate? Okay, so in theory, communism seeks to establish a society where everyone shares the benefits of labor equally and participates in governance. Well, we know that in communist companies, it's not everyone who's participating in governance. It's the select few who have agreed to go and go by the what the party wants. So I lived in China for a while, and really they tell the kids, don't make a decision about Christianity or any other religion until you're 21. Well, by the time they're 21, the whole point is that they're indoctrinated because they actually go away to high school. So the government gets to influence them then, right? They go away to high school. And then obviously they go away to college. So you've been indoctrinating them ever since they were little, and now you send them away, and then you tell them, oh, okay, now you can make a decision about, whether you're going to be choosing a religion or, and basically one of my students told me, they had to make a choice as to whether God was God or the government was God. Shocking, right? They have to make a decision whether God was God or the government was God. And of course, if you decide that God was God, then you're on the outskirts if you're not jailed. A student told me that during the Cultural Revolution, his grandfather, who was an educated man and professor, he actually was jailed for 3 years. So if you were educated, if you had any kind of ability to innovate or anything like that, you were actually jailed. So how is that a good system where you're punished and penalized for actually being intelligent? So listen to this, and remember, what I'm opining is that socialism is like an infant form of totalitarianism. Communism is the adolescent. When it finally grows up, it becomes totalitarianism. And what does that mean? Okay, well, we're going to find out. Totalitarianism is a political system where the state holds absolute authority, controlling all aspects of public and private life. It's characterized by a single-party dictatorship. A single-party dictatorship. So anyone opposing, anyone trying to come against that particular party is squashed. An extensive state control over the economy, society, and individual behavior. So that's why I say this is the adult form of socialism and communism. That's where you're going. Okay, because a person or a system left on its own, it's going to try to control. I mean, look at certain people. Some people absolutely have to have control, right? And we've heard power corrupts, right? And absolute power corrupts absolutely. So my point is, any rights the government gives you, the government can take away. And that is why in our Constitution, okay, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal by our Creator, right? And in so much as we're created equal by our Creator, we have freedom. Okay. Now, if you look in, I believe it's around Luke 18, and I do have a book coming out about that, about the rich young ruler. Now, Jesus Christ, being the maker of the entire universe, he made everything. He made us, right? Not even Jesus Christ, the King of the universe, the ruler of everything, demands absolute power over people. And he can have it. But he's given us our will, our free will. We are autonomous beings. So when you come under a system like a socialist or communist system, you're giving away your autonomy. You know, obviously, no one actually chooses to be under a totalitarian tyrant, you know, governor, ruler, whatever. It's not something you vote for, and that's by virtue of the fact that you don't vote for socialism and communism. You're really not voting for what the thing is going to grow up to be. And those regimes that pretend to offer, oh, you know, we just want everybody to be equal and have equal access to equal stuff and all the equity, equal. Okay, that you'll hear that a lot when someone is trying to snow you. Okay? But they're really just trying to snow you. You already have equal rights under God. The government will do everything for you. That's how they sell this thing. The government will give you everything: free school, free medical, free, you know, the government will do, assuming that the government has just deep pockets and never-ending funds. Well, where are they getting the never-ending funds? Well, they're robbing, one. Where everything comes from this centralized power, okay? Goods, services, the people retain nothing. The government will do everything for you. Where everything comes from a centralized power, rights, goods, services, the people retain nothing, okay? And then the government will be the one to give you all these things. Again, if you do something wrong, you're a dissenter, or for whatever reason, they can decide not to give you all these wonderful rights that they always promise. The people become the used and not the sovereign. Whereas under our system of a constitutional republic, the people are the sovereign. Okay, we don't have a sovereign just kind of bearing down on us, oppressing us, and that they are the power to be that be. In our system, we are the sovereign. So whenever we want to, if we don't like what we see in terms of a representative or somebody, we can replace that person by voting them out. So the people become the used in a totalitarian system and not the sovereign, as you have in a constitutional republic where leaders are democratically chosen. You know, there's a lot of desire for communism and socialist rule in this country, but that's because people think that, okay, it's never been done right. Socialism and communism always devolve into totalitarianism, but we know how to do it right, okay? That's never going to happen. And it's really, and they promise all these things because they're trying to enslave people. In socialist and communist regimes, yes, they are regimes because the power is taken by force. You don't vote for a totalitarian absolute ruler. You get one because they get it by force, and that's why it's a regime. And a lot of times it's done by some sort of the strongest rule. Remember Darwinian theory that survival of the fittest. So the strongest is going to rule. So whoever has charge of the army and the military, etc., is usually the one who can actually take or seize power. So the strongest will rule. That reminds us of the animal kingdom. Okay, where it's survival of the fittest, and there's again, lion, a pride of lions, a pack of wolves. Usually the alpha male is the one who's going to be in charge. And while strength is necessary, it is improper when it wrests power from the people and usurps its authority. Okay? So strength is good. Strength is good for maintaining order. Strength is good for keeping us safe. But when strength is used to usurp the power from the people, that's when you have a problem. So let's talk about a couple of these guys, okay, that have started for the people, like the Bolshevik revolution in Russia in 1917, okay, where they threw out the Tsar, they murdered the Tsar and his family. He was the ruler, the more of a king, right, in Russia. It was more of a monarchy. But Joseph Stalin is an example. He started for the people, supposedly, to help the little guy, to help people who were not, being treated well. They didn't have a lot, okay? So these people, they start out well, or maybe they already had the idea that, listen, I'm just going to say this to get my way, and I'm going to end up being ruler someday. And we have many of those through history, right? We have Chavez, we have Mussolini, we have Lenin, we have all of these people, right? We have in Africa, we have Idi Amin, we have all these people, right? You can go back in history and you can find where everyone, they start out right, they start out for the people, etc. But then very soon, when the people are under their thumb or under their authority, they can suppress them and use them for their own power. Joseph Stalin, he led the Communist Party from 1922 to his death in 1953. Okay? And you can go back and look at some of the horrendous things that this man did in the name of protecting the people. Well, we know it comes down to, it usually doesn't come down to protecting the people. And I'm going to just also opine that a lot of these people have personality defects. They have issues, and the obvious one too, right, is Adolf Hitler. Okay, he started off, for Germany, and all about Germany and the fatherland and blah blah blah. But he, again, another nutcase who wanted to rule the world because he was trying to, advance into all of these different places in Europe. But they all start out, quote unquote, well. We don't know that they're really well. Okay, because if you want to take over and if you want to rule people, absolutely, there's something wrong with you. There's something, some sort of personality defect. But we can't give them the excuse of insanity. They're just evil. They're just evil. So another one was Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Communist Party during the Bolshevik Revolution. Like I said, in 1917, they took over. So remember, World War I, this guy, his name is Princip, he is from Serbia. He assassinated the Austro-Hungary Archduke Ferdinand and his wife in, I think, June. Okay, is it 1914? Okay. Assassinated them, and then different nations in Europe would side with each other, and that's how World War I started. Okay, America did get involved in World War I, but it was America and Russia, actually, they were on the same side. Okay, but then when the Bolshevik Revolution started in 1917, Russia had to go back home to take care of business, and that's why Russia bowed out and America came into the World War I. Okay, so but during the Bolshevik Revolution, the people, led by Vladimir Lenin, okay, they overthrew and executed the Tsar and his family, again, the monarch and his family, and then they proceeded to oppress the people, okay, and then the people become powerless, and that's what happens during these regimes, okay. They don't value freedom and autonomy, and that's why they believe that the people need to be led and oppressed, and the people need to be used, as opposed to the people being the sovereign, which is what we have in this country. Notice that I'm going to keep singing that song. So, 1917, Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Communist Party. And of course, we said that 1922, 5 years later, Stalin takes over. Okay. So, the problem with these people when they have to, let's say they have to overthrow the government militarily, they have to do the same thing to keep the power. So if you have to exert this enormous amount of strength to gain the power, then you have to continue consistently in that way to maintain the power. So this is just a call for people to pay attention to what's going on right now. Pay attention to when you are presented with these idealistic theories of everyone should be, that we shouldn't have a society of classes where people are wealthy. And I remember the guy who was running for office, what's his name? Mandani, I don't want to misspell his name, but the one who's running for mayor in New York City, he believes in that we shouldn't have any billionaires. So no matter how hard you work, if you end up being a billionaire, you really shouldn't have $1 billion or billions of dollars. And believing in also the state-run stores and grocery stores, etc. And we know that these things do not work. You need private innovation. You need people to be people to use their different skills. Different people have different levels of skills. So to say that everyone has to have equitable access to everything is really, you're trying to create a more artificial society, because you can't have a society in which everybody is equal in everything. That is just not realistic. That's why I say watch what people promise, because usually what they're promising is something they're going to have to make. They're going to have to control and cajole and try to make it into a particular thing that it can never be. And often you're going to have those people who want to snuff out dissonance, snuff out people who disagree with them. And that's what seems to be happening in this nation today, where if you think differently, and this happens in families, right, as well, if you think differently from someone else, ideologically, politically, philosophically, then you stand the chance of being canceled, marginalized, even ridiculed. All of these things we see. But listen, if you have a personal conviction about something, if you have a belief system, like for instance, we think of Jesus Christ who made everything. And again, I go back to Luke 18 and that story about it's not a story, it's historical, right? About the rich young ruler. Okay, so this is a man who he's obeyed the law, he's done all these things, and he comes to Jesus and he asks Jesus, what do I have to do to gain eternal life? And Jesus says, not that because Jesus is against money and people having money, he says, sell all you have and give it to the poor. Sell all you have and give it to the poor. Now, it's not because Jesus didn't like people who are rich. And it's not because this man, needed to prove to God that he was worthy of eternal life. No, the problem he had, and which is why he went away sad, and he didn't do what the Lord suggested that he do. He went away sad because he didn't have his money. His money had him. Right? So, of course, that's not the system we're advocating for, where people are so in love with money and they do anything to get it, which is it's one of the risks of capitalism, okay? That people will not do right by the system. But that's the case in any system, okay? Even in those systems where you want people to have access to things, right? You don't want people to be starving or anything like that. And that's why in our system, we have the government comes along for a period of time. If you need some sort of financial assistance, you can have that financial assistance. But it's not a system where you're supposed to stay on that financial assistance and your generations and generations and generations. Is called welfare recidivism. the system is not prepared for that. And unfortunately, when you create a welfare system, you end up with a welfare mindset. I wrote in my book, Walking in Fulfillment of Prophetic Revelation, that any ism system that is not centered on Christ is going to fail. It's not only that, it's going to end up being unequal. So even capitalism is unequal. Socialism is unequal. Communism is unequal, no matter what they say. And the communist way of things, really, you have to build things on lies. Any system where certain people are going to be able to lord it over other people, it's always going to devolve into something totalitarian. So all that to say, Jesus had the best ideas, and freedom is the best ideas. And that's where you find a system of capitalism, you're also going to find more of Christianity. When you have Christianity is going to be based on people's freedom to decide, right? And that's why communist and socialist regimes hate Christianity and any religion or a system of faith that is based on the people's autonomy and their freedom. So that's why you have to close off the people from thinking that they can think on their own, they can decide on their own. No, you have to have a system where the government decides what you do, where you go, how much money you have, how much resources you have, etc. So these systems are not meant for people's good, no matter how much they lie and say, oh, we know we're trying to make sure that everybody is on an equal footing. That's not possible. All of these systems that promise all this free stuff, it's just so that you can get people on the side of the people who are saying, you can have all this free stuff, but once they have the people in their clutches, then they exert the force that they meant to exert all along.